You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 174. Today, we are doing hot seat number 5, where I am interviewing Tina, who is a grandmother of a little boy with autism. He started out with a diagnosis of global developmental delay, and his big areas, which we cover pretty extensively, are in the areas of feeding. He is eating baby food only at this point. So we talk all about some feeding ideas. He's talking, but some of his words are unclear. So we talk about how to get those words improving on articulation, how to get his language expanding. And the third thing we talk about is self-care skills, which is hand washing, toothbrushing, pulling up and down pants, drinking and eating himself without being fed. So we talk all about the 4-step Turn Autism Around approach, and I give specific ideas to improve in those 3 areas. It's a great episode. Hope you love it as much as I did. Let's get to this interview with Grandma Tina. Tina, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm excited to talk to you to do our hot seat number 5.
Thank you, Mary. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So why don't you tell our listeners and me about your fall into the autism world? Is that just something that happened as a grandparent, or did you know about autism before? Just kind of like, how did you fall into this world?
I knew the word autism. I maybe knew a little bit about it, but not very much. My grandson was born in September of 2019. I retired January of 2020. Of course, then we had pandemic, and when he was about 6 months old, he was clicking along fine at 6 months old, but at his 9-month appointment, the pediatrician was asking my daughter-in-law several questions. Is he doing this? Is he doing that? Is he doing this? And she was answering no, no, no. And she said, is he supposed to be doing all of these things? And he hadn't been around other babies with COVID, and they didn't know typical from non-typical. None of us did. And so anyways, his pediatrician suggested a developmental pediatrician. And so our family got together, started searching. My daughter's sister-in-law is a pediatrician. She went to Vanderbilt Medical School, and so she had colleagues here at Vanderbilt, and she helped us to find a developmental pediatrician that specialized more so in Wyatt's young age. And what seemed like a long time then, but now I know wasn't, in about 4 months time, we had an appointment with that developmental pediatrician. At that time, he was diagnosed with global delays.
And that was at what age?
13 months.
Global delays at 13 months. And then that same developmental pediatrician diagnosed him with autism, or?
At 19 months, yes, 6 months later.
Okay.
Yes, in the meantime, then I started going online and just basically researching initially global delays. I started seeing the word autism, and started researching more in that area, because then signs were more apparent and I could sort of see, that maybe that was going to be where we were. And so I found out about your course. I watched the video, and I was also sort of in the process of picking myself up and saying, it's time to do something. You're retired. My husband had also retired by that time. We've got time. We've got some abilities. Let's get going on something, And so I got your toddler course, and at about 14, 15 months, we started our little couple-minute version of table time.
Wow. So you became a gung-ho grandma, like our grandma. episode, I forget the number, but you said before we started hitting record that you had watched that and you had hoped that someday you'd become a gung-ho grandma, and look at you have, right?
Well, thank you. That's certainly my aspiration for sure.
Did you have a background in education or anything related?
No, well, sort of sidebar. I was in human resources at my job for some years, and there I had a lot of courses in mediation, conflict resolution, behavior, that type of thing for dealing with grown-ups in the human resources world, which some of that turned out to transfer a little bit, but no, not as far as autism and that kind of thing, no.
Yeah. You say that, human resources and dealing with, problem employees and adults, and it is all related. I mean, I was a nurse manager and then I became a behavior analyst. There's a whole field of ABA called OBM, Organizational Behavior Management. And it's all the same principles, whether we're talking about young kids with autism or we're talking about, employees. And so I've done some podcasts on these principles. Amy Sutherland, who wrote the book, What Shamu Taught You. We can link that in the show notes. But I mean, everything, the 4 functions are all related to all of our behavior, good behavior, bad behavior, whether you have autism or global delays or you're typically developing. And so it's interesting that really anybody's background can apply, right?
Absolutely, in some way.
Yeah, exactly. So, and we do have permission for you to talk about Wyatt, to use his first name. We have permission from you. We have permission from Wyatt's parents as well. And, I really
Absolutely
do want to, tip my hat to people like you and Wyatt's parents for sharing your story, because only when we all share our stories. I know you said you listened to the previous hot seats I did, your hot seat number 5, it helps. It helps to say, okay, well, I read your Turn Autism Around book, or I've done your courses, but these kids are all different ages, all different strengths and needs. So you have submitted your assessments and plans and everything like that. So I'm assuming that you do live near Wyatt and you do have him at your house for some time, not full time, but some days. Is that correct?
That's correct. He actually has ABA therapy here at our house 2 days a week and 3 days a week at his house. And so, yes, he's here anywhere for some hours, 3-4 days a week. And whenever he's here for any amount of time, we work some table time in. And then his parents on their side, I gave his mom your book when it came out. And so they actively work to keep Wyatt engaged, as much as possible throughout the day. And then he has his other therapies where he goes to a clinic for those therapies.
Yeah. So since you've started my course, at 14 or 15 months of age, and now it's a whole year later, he's 2 years and 6 months. Is that correct?
He is. He is. He's 2.5 now, almost 2 years and 7 months. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what kind of progress has he made through, all the early intervention programs, as well as by you taking my course?
Well, he just seems to be progressing really well in several areas. Others, have been more challenging as far as feeding, self-care, that type of thing. But we are working on those. But table time, like I said, initially was a few minutes. I had a little chair that he really was barely even sitting up in. So we had a chair and I'd stuff pillows around it, and so I gathered the materials and I was sort of trying to work with the shoebox. I got pictures of parents and grandparents, but he was he didn't want me to work with his hands at all. and that at that point. And so I did several times go to the Facebook group, the community, and Kelsey and others were always very prompt and helpful, and really were just giving me some suggestions, but also, just advising, just keep working, keep going, even if it's a few minutes a day, but be patient. He's so young, and just be patient, but keep going. And that was very helpful to me to, it's just, I'm not doing anything I should be doing. He's young too, and we're learning together.
Yeah. And when you say he didn't want you to do anything with his hands, he was prompt resistant. He didn't want you to touch him, walk him through. And we see that with kids with autism. I don't know if it's a sensory thing. I don't know if in the past, everybody's been trying to over prompt. And I know with our programs, that's one of the reasons why we do like to paratable. We do like the early learner materials. We do like to actually not dive in right away with sign language, because a lot of times if you're trying to, go in and trying to manipulate their hands, even if they are going to get something, it's just too much. It's like rushing in and you're like so confused and so not aware, that we like to really have the child be calm and move their bodies as much as possible. And then always, and I'm sure you and your son and daughter-in-law are very gentle, and in the early intervention professionals are gentle too. But even if you are gentle, too much prompting will become aversive, and that's what happens with young kids that are very delayed. So instead of like the child just getting their coat on, then when therapy starts, it's like, well, they got to help, and that becomes aversive, and that can lead to problem behaviors, prompt resistance, and also tantrums and other, more serious problem behaviors if you push it too hard. So I do have quite a bit in my Turn Autism Around book about self-care and how that's really important. And in terms of, we're going to dive into his particular assessments, but also just to circle back to that global delay, that is a very common diagnosis of kids early on. Okay. Just did a podcast interview that's going to come out a week or two before this podcast. And that is with Dr. Cheryl Tierney Avis, who is a developmental pediatrician. And we talk about the new CDC milestones in terms of surveillance. And so those questions that they were asking Wyatt's mom, does he do this? Does he do that? Does he do that? That was with the old guidelines, which are now, there have been some pretty significant changes, but that is surveillance just to catch kids that aren't sitting up, that aren't drinking from an open cup, that are not, looking when somebody comes in the room, or whatever the specific well-checked surveillance criteria are. We can link Dr. Cheryl Tierney Avis's podcast right here too. And a lot of times these show notes are really good for, kind of digging in a little deeper. And so I know there's many, many families out there and early intervention professionals who are struggling with kids that sound very similar to Wyatt. So again, let's just dive into, there are 4 steps of the Turn Autism Around approach. And the first step is assessment. And so you've done a nice job where you completed the 1-page assessment, and you also, before we get into the 1-page assessment, let's just talk about the language sample. And the language sample, when you started my course, which was over a year ago, you did a language sample. This is what we're going to post in the show notes is a more recent language sample from March. And it looks like he's got several sounds and words and word approximations, several clear words, several unclear words and so on. In March of 22, at table time in 15 minutes, he said table clearly. He said table, moon, bee, ball, donkey, roar, baby, and owl. And you'll see a lot of 1 to 2 syllable words with kids. And so that's great that he has that many clear words. And then he has a handful of other words that are less clear. And then you also did a language sample while you were driving. Well, hopefully you weren't driving, you were recording.
I wasn't.
We were riding in a car together. I'm just looking down here. That would be funny. Well, not funny. Don't do that while you're driving. Anyway, riding in a car with Wyatt. And that's a good way. Like these language samples, people are like, well, should I try to engage them? Should I do it at the table? Should I do it outside? Do a couple samples, because you might notice that in the afternoons outside, you get more language, or you might notice that at table time with the materials, you get more language and you get different words. And so doing a couple of these 10 or 15 minute up to an hour language samples are just a great idea. So it looks like he's got a lot of words. He also said apple, me, ball, and bite. And then some unclear words. Some of the unclear words you have written down on your language sample. Again, this is going to be in the show notes. This is going to be podcast 174. So marybarbera.com/174. If you are outside running or exercising or in a car and you can't write it down, you can always search Mary, autism, grandparent, hot seat, 5, whatever, and you will find it, but it's going to be 174. Anyway, the language samples showed some unclear words like truck and fly. And when you think about like truck and fly versus bee and me and ball, truck and fly have really pretty difficult blends, which is hard. You also have under unclear words, butterfly. And so that's a 3-syllable word. So we have to always look at the words for clues. I remember in my book or my course, I talk about Chino, my little former client Chino, who could say Cheeto and he could say no, but he didn't say Chino correctly. And so sometimes it's looking for clues within the clear and unclear words. Okay. Then that's part of the assessment, the 1-page assessment, which you filled out, which is available in a PDF fillable format, as well as a handwritten format. And that's going to be in the show notes as well. So the biggest struggles that Wyatt is having right now, can you tell our listeners what you're most concerned about, just generally on the 1-page assessment?
Generally would definitely be feeding. He only eats baby foods that are fed to him, and he drinks water from a cup and a straw cup, but he'll put it up to his mouth. We have gotten that to where he'll take the cup, put it up to his mouth, the straw cup, but we still have to actually do the squeeze to get the water into his mouth. We're starting to work now with the open cup, but it has the top with the little slit in it. You can tell me if that's good or not, but it seems like that helps him. He can lift it up, and then he's getting to where he'll sort of turn it up to drink a little bit. But that's where we have been. He does eat a great variety of different baby foods, but our issues have been more with texture than variety.
Okay. And so in terms of feeding, does he drink anything else, like out of a bottle or?
No, he's been off the bottle. He has a pacifier at nap and bedtime, but he only drinks water. Since it's been such a manual process with the water, we were we weren't sure about introducing juices or anything like that, because we want it to be sure it's important that he gets enough water each day. So water right now is what he has.
And he doesn't drink any milk.
No, we give him yogurt as far as his baby foods for hopefully some milk, that kind of thing. But no, not milk since he's been off the bottle and formula.
And how long has he been off the bottle and formula? Was that an easy process, or has that been just recent?
No, he pretty much took himself off the bottle. He didn't want it. I don't know if it was the sucking. I don't know if it was the formula. I don't know what it was, but he never really was that fond of it. And then I guess maybe about 6 months or so ago, he just sort of almost pretty much started refusing it.
Okay.
So took himself off.
He doesn't, and before I continue, I do want to say, like, everything I say here, everything about, talking, eating, anything I say is for informational purposes only. I can't actually give you real advice because I don't know Wyatt. I've never observed him. I've never looked at his, assessments, especially with feeding. I want to make that announcement because, he could have chewing, swallowing problems. He could have malnutrition. He could have scabies. He could have, and here I am talking about X, Y, and Z, and I should be, focusing on that. But this is just a discussion to help people out there.
Yes.
So the episode 95 with Dr. Keith Williams is really important because he's an internationally known researcher in the field of picky eating and feeding disorders. And he was on 95 and he said, like, scurvy and rickets is through the roof now for, first time he's seen it in decades. And these kids are actually, and I don't think that's the case because he's getting baby food and that probably has like a lot of the nutrition in there. But so we want to link that in the show notes. Has he ever progressed to, like, he won't eat any like Cheerios or those cracker things that babies chew on? He doesn't do any of that?
Well, in fact, just here recently, my daughter-in-law has told me that at his feeding therapy and speech therapy, they're able to give him, they're like the little star-shaped kind of, I don't know if they're crackers or whatever, but they break off like the points of the star and give him that. Maybe he's barely, and he'll accept that a little bit. As far as with Dr. Williams, that was one of my favorite podcasts. I did order his book. I was actually very fortunate. I emailed him and we were actually able to speak a couple of times. He was good enough to call me, and he was the person that actually worked with us to help get him to get the cup, accept the cup, and get the cup to his mouth, and eventually. And so he was great. And of course, it was just general information. Also, he didn't know Wyatt, but he was just kind to talk to me and walk me through a little bit of that. But like you say, it's kind of intimidating, I guess, for all of us because of choking or gagging or throwing up. That where I can be more of a detective and try things with speech and play. Not so much with feeding.
Yeah, it's really dangerous. Now, is he gagging or throwing up?
No, we've been really lucky with that. He has had gastrointestinal examinations, some feeding evaluations. In fact, he's going to have another one in a couple of months. They haven't found any medical reasons, though, because I know how you stress ruling out medical, and so we're trying to do that. But yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing is, if you might want to investigate, like, I forget what they're called, but like they're little hard cookies that 9-month-olds just suck on, and just see if he'll take that, or with a feeding therapist there. But there are all kinds of feeding therapists too, and there's more like sensory oral versus behavioral. And I would say, Dr. Williams and my approach is really behavioral. I mean, of course, ruling out the medical issues too. And I'm thinking his height and weight is okay.
Yes, his height and weight is okay. Now, his weight is a little bit under average, but it's not at a point of medical concern.
Mm-hmm. And
he's
how about
definitely slender boy
that have like chunks in them? Will he accept that?
I don't know that I've tried that, and that would be a good idea to try something like that. The other
thing, especially with kids on the spectrum, they can get very brand specific and container specific. So if you're out buying jars of baby food with the little baby on it and feeding him directly out of that, I would really investigate whether you can puree real foods, puree it down, smooth, then stop, I mean, of course, this is all assuming he can swallow and everything. But I do have a story that I've told many places. I'm not sure where I tell it, if I tell it in my current book, but, I evaluated a 6-year-old who was eating corn chips and French fries in the cafeteria at school. And then his mom wanted to see me and she came in and he was 6 and, she's like, I'm losing my mind. Her husband was off fighting in Iraq or Afghanistan. And, I have him and I have an 8-year-old son and I can't even take him to the grocery store. He's not potty trained. So it's like money for diapers and he's clearing shelves. And he didn't seem like that at school. And then I said, well, what about food? And she said French fries and corn chips. And then I said, well, what about proteins and vegetables? And she's like, oh, only in the baby food. And I was just like, baby food? But I was trying not to be like, what? A 6-year-old who can chew and swallow eating baby food? That sounds weird. And I said, well, how much baby food are you buying? And she said 52 jars a week. So, why it's different. He's had global delays. He's never eaten. He doesn't eat corn chips and French fries, but there may be listeners out there who do baby food because of the nutritional facts and they can chew and swallow. But like one step towards more normal food is to start doing your own food, taking away the processed baby food that's in certain containers, even dumping out, regular applesauce, regular, when Lucas did a feeding program, for instance, every time he had a meal, it was in styrofoam cups that were not see-through, so that he didn't know what was coming. So, it was applesauce, yogurt, maybe. And I know for this.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. So some of that you may want to play around with. And then if you were pureeing your own, you could change the texture and make it lumpier. Okay. And then the other thing about feeding, which I would recommend for everybody, you didn't do it because he's really just taking the baby food that you feed him. But in chapter 10 of my book and in the free book resources, which you can get, which we can link in the show notes, there is a feeding form where you put down the easy foods, the medium foods, and the difficult foods. And as you progress towards more chunky things, maybe you could make those, or maybe he does have a preference, like with, he doesn't like orange baby food, or he doesn't like, bananas or whatever. And that could go in the medium. And so instead of just, okay, he's 2.5 and he's just going to get smooth baby food, non-orange or non-banana or non-fruit, start to apply these techniques where it's a slow shaping to get him to eat better and to eat variety. Yeah. Well, it's very exciting that Dr. Keith Williams did call you back and helped you a little bit, which is very nice.
He was so kind.
Yeah, very
nice. Very kind.
Okay, so the feeding, I think we kind of went over some of the ideas for feeding. Also, I will link in the show notes. I did a really good podcast interview with Melly Potok recently from Munchbug. And she is a SLP who specializes in feeding. She has a little mini course, and she also has a lot of good graphics on Instagram about what sippy cups to buy, what not to buy. I would really try to get him off of a pacifier at night and nap. I don't know that that's a huge problem. If he was on a bottle, I definitely, I have 6 steps to weaning. We can link in the show notes, weaning from anything, even weaning from baby food. You can apply these same techniques in a behavioral way. And then finally, in terms of the feeding, you already have feeding evaluations and feeding people in place, but make sure you get behavioral feeding people into the mix, because you'll make more progress, I think. And then also no calories in between meals, but that's not such a problem because he's fed his, somebody feeds him. That's another thing is, if anybody works on, you could have adaptive spoons with thicker stuff like applesauce versus very thin stuff that comes off the spoon very easily. You might want to have him start to feed himself. And if he could suck on like cookie kind of things that are made for babies, that might be good as well. All right. So on to language ideas. Oh, before we go to the language, let me just say that from the 1-page assessment, I know we kind of jumped into feeding very quickly, but from the 1-page assessment, that's when you create your 1-page plan with the strengths and the needs. So before we jump into some language interventions that I might try based on Wyatt's specific examples, from the 1-page plan, you did say he has some strengths. Can you tell our listeners just a few of his strengths?
Yes. He sleeps well, sleeps through the night, knocking on wood, and then we takes a nap. He imitates, and he loves to imitate. He's able to label items in books. He loves to do that. I've been trying so hard not to go further than I should with him, but he loves letters, numbers, shapes. He just loves that. He loves to identify them. And so we have sort of, and I recently, I don't know if it's a podcast, but something we said, if they really like it, then move forward with it. And so we have some, but he usually responds to his name, and he'll clap, touch body parts, stomp, wave his arms, and all of that. Usually you can just say, "Can you clap?" and he'll clap. I don't have to show him a clap. And so he'll do those things just verbally with us, verbally asking.
Nice.
And works on puzzles. He's starting to do some matching. I'm so excited every time I see him scanning, and picking something out. It's just the things about your course that have been so helpful to me to know how important of a skill that is. And I tell you, just maybe 3 or 4 months ago, it was still, just sort of a few minutes. And then, like you had said at one point, it almost seems like it starts clicking and it starts moving along quicker. And then I'm like, oh gosh, I do need the early learner course, and I better get on it quick, when for so many months he really wasn't ready for it yet. So, and he enjoys sitting at the table, which is great too.
Yeah, which is huge. I mean, I think sleeps well and enjoys being at the table and imitates and matches. I mean, those are all amazing skills. And he has some language, and he has more language than he had a month or 2 ago. And he has more language, that's coming. And so all of that, I think, is going to help. So those are all listed on the strengths column. And then the needs are the baby food, the feeding issues. One other thing I wanted to say, and a couple other ideas about feeding, is making sure that his zinc level is okay. I did a podcast with Missy Olive where we talked about zinc, and I also did a video blog on the zinc to copper ratio being messed up. And then there's other blood draws that you can do, zinc and copper, and you can also look at like magnesium and other things. And also the juice question, you said he just drinks water, you didn't know about juice. In the Keith Williams episode, he actually says that for some kids, he does like to introduce juice, and that has a lot of vitamin C in it. And I think he's getting that in the baby food, but and those little juice cups are they're easy. And then they're also have a very thin straw with a squeezy thing. He may be able to handle, he may be able to handle that juice. And if he likes sweet things, it may become very reinforcing to hold it and to suck all at the same time. Now, I wouldn't let him run around with anything related to eating, but I know when Lucas did a feeding program, he only ever drank water, and they did introduce juice. It's also good for putting like medications and supplements in it. It also, also like smoothies. Even if you can scoop smoothies in, you can mix all kinds of vegetables and fruits. And, if you did need zinc or magnesium, you could put that in. So those all might be something to consider. Okay, so also in the needs column, besides the eating, which is, I think really would be my top priority, but talking, and then also self-care. And then at the bottom part, your plan, you have, basically just continue what you're doing. And it's great that you moved from the toddler course to the verbal behavior bundle. You added that recently. It's all related, and you might think, well, do I really need? Yes, actually, if you want to keep learning, it's just like learning the guitar. You're not going to be great at the guitar if you stop after, the first series of lessons. It's the same thing for anything we're learning. And these are complex questions. And the fact that you have time, you have the motivation. I mean, I can't think of somebody with more motivation than you. And once you start seeing progress, which you're seeing, it becomes easier and easier to, I'm going to make a plan. I'm going to do those 5 hours, the next 20-minute lesson. I'm going to make a plan to start that tomorrow. I'm going to have a plan that when Wyatt comes over on Thursday, we're going to try a juice box. We're going to try, X, Y, and Z, because, hey, if you can see it right before your eyes, it becomes incredibly motivating to keep going.
Yes, absolutely. It does. It really does.
Yeah. Okay, so before we move on to, and then self-care is also a big one. So we're going to talk about language and self-care. Do you have any, before we move on to language and self-care ideas, do you have any questions about feeding?
Well, I've made a lot of notes, and those are just a lot of great suggestions. We do, from listening to you, I have taken it out of the baby food out of the jars, and you have the segmented dishes that we use. But I like that even more about the styrofoam, where he really can't even see, because he's very attuned to, oh, what's that color? I'm not used to that color of baby food, that kind of thing, very notices things like that. So that'll be great.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So for language ideas, and these, I took a little bit of time last night, went through all your assessments and language samples. So these are related to what you wrote down, but I'm sure that others listening can also benefit. So I do explain somewhere in the course for sure. And I think in maybe my first book, not sure about my second book, but I talk about these ideas so much that I don't know exactly where they're at. But the number 1 and number 2 word lists. Are you familiar with that concept?
Do you mean lists that I would make?
list that you would make. So what you do, and I'll pull out for those that are watching and not just listening, if I can find a marker. Hold on. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this can be done on a piece of paper, or I'm just going to use my whiteboard here. So Wyatt has some clear words and some unclear words. So basically, number one words are clear, and number two words are unclear. Okay, and this would be a general list that you would add to. And if you have a child with a lot of words, now Wyatt is 2.5, so he should have, a lot of words, but he's also a fairly new talker. So I wouldn't get too crazy about articulation at the moment, but what you don't want to happen is you don't want number one words to fall apart, because everybody's kind of reinforcing different variations. So number one words can sometimes be clear, sometimes not be clear. So apple is clear. Now, what does that mean, clear? You know what I mean? Like his mom could think appa is clear, and you could think apple is clear. And, and for a 2-year-old, 2.5-year-old, even if they didn't just start talking, there is some subjectivity to it. I would say that if you can have somebody else present the cards and you can turn away, you don't know what the cards show, and he's saying apple, enough for you or your husband or your daughter to go yeah, that was apple. That's clear enough.
Okay.
But apple's a good one to write down first, because it really is great if this list is in alphabetical order. So that way I know what a clear word is and what clear words Wyatt has or the child has. So apple, bite, ball, bite, bee. When you were asking about number and letters and colors, actually, I wrote down is I would get A, B, C, and 1, 2, 3 puzzles, because he already has B. I think he has some other letter names.
Okay.
One syllable. So letters and numbers are one syllable, so that they have motivation. Yes, I would do it. I had a little client who needed a lot of reinforcement, had extreme feeding problems, only drank out of a bottle, and ate gluten-free crackers morning, noon, and night. That's it. Just drank almond milk. And we actually went to Keith Williams for an evaluation and treatment, and we needed bite for bite reinforcement, and that was ABC puzzles. So I think that's fine. That's on my list. But anyway, just getting back to our number two word. So then unclear would be, let's say, cat, dog, fly, and maybe by cat we would just say he says ka instead of cat, like he doesn't put the T on. Dog, he might say og. I'm just saying whatever. Fly, he might say fi. And so you would put what he says. And then you'd work with an SLP, a speech and language pathologist, if needed, or you'd say, he doesn't say cat with a T, but he says pot, or he says something else or with Chino, he says Cheeto. Like that's an important word, because it's so related to his name.
Yes.
And even with your ABC puzzles, if he could say why, then he'd have the first part of his name. Right. So, and, you might think, well, cat at is important because, and it, so you get why it, and then if you can get it and you can get why, you have his name. So looking for clues at the unclear, but the real important thing is so that everybody knows his number one lists in alphabetical order. So I can scan it quickly and I can say he has mama. He doesn't have mommy. He has ball. He has bee, but he doesn't have bumblebee or whatever. And then that Excel sheet could be updated every week or every month. And that sheet could go on his binder. It could go on your refrigerator, on mom's refrigerator, at school. And so that we're all on the same team. We're all on Team Wyatt to get his language up. So that is the number 2 word list. Yes. Awesome. Okay. So we want to keep the bar high for those number 1 words, and we want to make sure they are practiced throughout the day as much as possible, not just at the table.
Okay.
We want to have pictures of all those words. So for the shoebox, we want to have double pictures of all those words for matching. We want to have lots of pictures. You want to have a set of pictures at your house, a set of pictures at mom's house, unless you're traveling with materials, which is fine too. And then there's an articulation blog, podcast and blog with Dr. Joanne Garanser we can link with some of these ideas, additional ideas. When you say he's drinking out of a cup with a straw and he's starting to drink out of an open cup, does he ever drink out of like a spill-proof sippy cup at other times during the day on his own? Does he drink from anything on his own?
No, he doesn't drink from anything.
What about a water bottle with a sports cap? Have you tried that? Like with a nozzle thing. I would not try that. And I wouldn't try a bit. This is a huge bottle. I wouldn't try a huge bottle. I would try like a baby bottle, like a little kitty with a sports thing, because it's water.
Okay.
And that's good to travel with. But no spill-proof sippy cups, because they're really bad for articulation and for sucking. So Joanne Garanser, when I read her name, that made me think of her. She's key for that. And then just continue with your early learner materials daily. I would add song time if you don't have that going. A lot of these fill-ins can be songs, can go with imitation, can go with prompt resistance, make it fun. It'll also increase imitation, which you said he likes to do. There's an imitation blog you can watch. We can link that. And then I would add ABC and 1, 2, 3 puzzles. Okay. Any questions about those language ideas?
Well, it just seems like the vowels are great, and he has a few consonants, B, M, W, but I think a lot of the word issues come with not having very many consonants, and I never had thought about it before, but like if I do a T, I've got to have my tongue at the top of, there's some movements to it, and so I never thought about having to break that down and learn that.
Look at blends and look at whether the T is at the beginning of the word or the end of the word or the middle of the word, and your tongue movements. And he obviously has oral motor movement issues with feeding. We also did a podcast interview with an SLP BCBA Mags Kirk on talk tools. Might be something to look into. And we can link that as well. Okay. And then finally, the self-care issues. You filled out the self-care checklist. We can put that in the show notes. We'd want to break down in the bonus video vault, because you are a member of our verbal behavior bundle. There is a hand washing bonus video. I think that hand washing bonus video is actually free for everybody too. We can link that in the show notes. There is an additional bonus video in the verbal behavior bundle all about those consonants, vowels, and vowels do come through.
Oh, great.
So you can look at that. So you have the self-care checklist by Dr. Mark Sundberg. That's excellent. We want to always prompt from behind. So if you're trying to have him feed himself or bring a cup to his mouth, you want to be behind him if at all possible. And hand washing, you want to be behind him. Brushing teeth, you want to be behind him. You always want to be gentle, have strong reinforcement after those kind of things. Small water bottles with spouts, juice boxes, the honey bear cup, you can squeeze and the juice or water will come up. And then even for pants up and down over a diaper, you want to be behind him. Again, gentle.
Okay.
You can use video modeling of different things. Maybe that will help. Having you said Wyatt has some cousins, maybe they could do something on video, like brush their teeth instead of just them brushing.
Oh,
you could do like toothpaste, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're counting while they're doing each part. All kinds of things you can Google on YouTube for toothbrushing, 2-year-old brushing teeth with song. Just try to make it fun, make it appealing. And those are just some of my ideas. I mean, just keep going with the courses, keep spreading the word. So we're going to wrap up. Any last idea or questions about those ideas for feeding, language, or self-care?
Well, I guess on the language, I'm thinking that I'll learn this in the early learning, but he does like to imitate. And so sometimes it's almost like we know he knows the word, but he doesn't say it until we say it first. So I guess the strategy to have that become more proactive on his part instead of needing to be prompted in the beginning.
Yeah, and in the early learner course, which is the first part of the VB bundle, we talk about transfer trials and we talk about errorless teaching. And that's the other key, is to get all of these words as pictures. That way, it's not like I can hold up a ball and if he doesn't say ball, I can say ball or a buh and see what he says. And then I can try it again. Oh, right. What is it? And so that's a transfer.
Oh, okay.
Is like you do an echoic prompt and then you say, okay, that's right. Do it again, say it again. So everything can be taught. And that's the way you fade your prompts, is with transfer trials.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay, let's move on to just in general, your role as a grandparent. Like you've been able to, become the co-captain of the ship. Like it's not your child, but it's your grandchild. And you've been able to work with the family to, really help Wyatt. But I do see some grandparents in our community, and we have several, are in a more frustrating situation because they can't get through to the professionals, or they can't get through to the child's parents to, not use punishment or to do this or to, are you, do you have any advice for grandparents who are out there who are not in as good of a situation in terms of collaboration?
Well, just to try as much as possible to collaborate, I think, because of course I always have to be cognizant and realize that they are the parents, and there's nobody that wants Wyatt to succeed any more than his mom and dad. And so, for example, they really weren't, I wasn't that familiar with ABA, and they weren't at all. And maybe if they were, it was what I sort of called the old ABA. But they had a trust in me because I felt so strongly about your program and about ABA therapy in general to give it a try, And so conversely, she had a really good relationship with the therapist at the clinic. And so that let me know that's all what I need to know. She has a good feeling about it, a good rapport. And so we sort of have common paths, and then we have our paths we're forging too. But just try to have a lot of communication and try to work on collaboration as much as you can, while realizing I am the grandparent, I'm not the parent, and to just work as hard as I can continue with your courses and table time, etc. And they've incorporated some of that into their lives too.
That's great. So before I let you go, I think this is a really great episode and will be valuable for a lot of people for years to come. But before I let you go, I like to really not just help the kids, but help the parents and the grandparents and the professionals listening to be less stressed and lead happier lives. So do you have any wisdom for us, any self-care tips or stress management tools that you use that you would recommend?
Just a couple come to mind. One being that my husband and I, we both love to travel. And so a couple of 1 or 2 times a year, we'll take what we call a big trip. But throughout the year, we'll also have some weekend trips. My daughter and my granddaughters live in Atlanta, so we might go to Atlanta. Also, this year is my son and daughter-in-law's 10th anniversary, and so they were able to get away for almost a week, and we watched Wyatt. It was great, and so I could just see from their pictures how relaxed and how happy they looked. And so travel, I think, is a good refresher and a good getaway. And then secondly, what I've learned, I guess I always knew it, but was reinforced in books that I've read, is when I start it starts getting weighing on me, I can think about many things, many blessings, and many things to be thankful for. And a lot of it is things that I see him do that maybe a year ago I would have watched some of the videos of the kids at table time, and I would think, if Wyatt could just do any of that, it would be so wonderful. And now to see that, I think just the attitude of gratitude and thankfulness of our blessings, has helped me a lot.
Well, I think those are excellent to end with. You are a blessing to our community. You're a blessing to Wyatt and to his parents, and for helping us spread the word that, just put one foot in front of the other. Doesn't matter what the strengths and needs are. We can make progress. We can collaborate, communicate, and really make great strides. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Mary. We appreciate you so much. You're definitely part of our family, friends, professional community, and you have given me so many great resources. Your course, of course, but also Dr. Williams, Dr. Sunbar, Temple Grandin, I could go on and on with the people that you've introduced me to that have helped change our lives.
Well, thank you. All right. Have a good one, and I'll catch you all next week.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Mary.